Mysore Kingdom was one of the first places in India where women got the right A to vote for the representative assembly members and B to be part of the representative assembly.
Wow.
I find that time very, very fascinating
Yeah.
because there's something about the time period
Yeah.
and that's what I'm trying to discover in the books. Birds and animals are constantly moving from one place to another, and then you understand things like, let's say you have elephants entering a tea plantation. Where else will they go? Because that's their path. Gandhiji came to Bangalore, so Mirza Ismail gets a letter from the British Commissioner saying, don't be so vocal in your praise about him. So you see they're also negotiating these balances. Researching the book has helped me learn a lot about that.
Today we are joined by Dr. Harini Nagendra, an ecologist, acclaimed author, and director at Azim Premji University. From sustainability science to detective fiction, her pioneering work connects nature, society, and imagination. She's an award-winning ecologist, a celebrated author, and the mind behind the Bangalore Detectives Club. From decoding the language of trees to uncovering the mysteries of human behavior, her journey reminds us that science and art aren't opposites. They are reflections of the same curiosity. Let's dive into this conversation that promises insights, stories, and inspiration.
Today I'm joined by Harini Nagendra. She's the Director of School of Climate Change and Sustainability at Azim Premji University. I'm really excited to know about her journey. Thank you, Harini, for joining us today.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
I read that you've written novels and that you've been working actively on a lot of research on climate change and sustainability. I would like to start about your novel, the Bangalore Detective Club mystery series. So what, in your opinion, do detective fiction lovers see and love about the book?
That's very interesting because, I mean, like you said, so my day job is climate change and sustainability. That's my core work. And then the fiction sort of happened on the side. And it's 1920s Bangalore. No? So I was wondering, I thought it would be fairly niche. I loved 1920s Bangalore. So, but what I find readers like about it is the very strong sense of place. Because they see that, it's so embedded. Like the Bangalore of the 1920s is almost like a character itself in the books. And they also like the fact that it's a cozy mystery. It's not very, hard hitting. But I talk about some very grim themes like, women and patriarchy and their lack of access to education. I talk about the caste system. I talk about human-animal conflict, the British exploitation of nature, the build-up to independence and the British exploitation of their, the Indians. So I think they're enjoying the fact that they can read it and without. So there is the subjects that are discussed might be grim, but they can read it in an entertaining fashion while looking for the murder and solving the mystery in their minds.
Nice. And also the main character, Kaveri Murthy, where did you draw the inspiration from?
She completely landed in my head. So there was one day, it was in 2007 when I started writing the books because the first book was published in 2021, but I started writing it, in my head. In 2007, she just parachuted into my head completely formed and she was fiercely feminist. She was from she was from old Bangalore, originally set in the 1890s, but I moved to 1920s later. But I think subconsciously, it came from a lot of strong women in my family. And as everyone has in their family, my grandmother would have been around the age of Kaveri. She was born in 1908. She got married at 12 and had a large family. But she could read and write in 5 languages, was fiercely powerful, in her family. My mother-in-law and mother, for their times in the 1960s, went to the hostel and studied, did a BSc, but couldn't work. Towards the end of their life, they would talk about, my mother's still with me, my mother-in-law before she passed away, we talk a lot about the fact that they couldn't do anything professionally. And so I think it was all of those mixtures of things. And I said, writing about Kaveri is very, very interesting because I explore what it is to be a woman of those times, wanting to study. But I can sort of rewrite history by making her have access to the opportunities that many women didn't have.
Yeah. And who are the other characters to look out for in the book, would you say?
Kaveri has a very strong and supportive husband. Her husband Ramu is a doctor with the British. He's an Indian doctor working with the British, and he initially is very bemused. It's an arranged marriage, and he is very bemused with his wife he is married, who is not what he expected her to be. He just thought she would be quiet and stay at home while he went to work. And they learn over the 5 books. I'm writing now the 5th book.
Yeah.
This arc, they learn to respect each other and, fall in love through the period. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And he helps her navigate. She does the home front. So she knows what's happening with people's lives, the gossip, the intrigue and the home front. And therefore, who's likely to have been in the situation of maybe committing a murder or being an accessory, and he knows what's happening on the work front. So they're a very strong couple. There's Inspector Ismail, who is one of my favorite characters because I didn't make him up again. He walked into the page as I was writing. I had another character in mind. But he is a Muslim policeman of the 1920s, very senior, very, very intelligent, but also very fond of Kaveri because she reminds him of his daughter. So he supports her a lot while solving her mysteries. There is gossipy neighbor Uma auntie, who is, everyone has a gossipy auntie who knows everyone in the neighborhood. But Uma auntie couldn't study, and so Kaveri teaches her how to read and write, and she forms the first member of the Bangalore Detectives Club. So there's Uma auntie. Then in the very first book, she meets this woman who is a prostitute who was forced into prostitution and had a very difficult life. These are the subjects that I was taking a cover, and it's suspected of murder. So Kaveri tries to help her out, and Mala then becomes a character in the rest of the books. In book 2, there is Anandi, who's a housemaid who is being abused by her husband. So Ramu and Kaveri take Anandi and sort of help her, rehabilitate her, and then she gets a job, and then she becomes a very independent character of her own. And then Anandi is part of the books. So that's why it's the Bangalore Detectives Club, because together they solve the mysteries. And the last I shouldn't forget, there is a milk boy, my favorite character actually. He's Venu the milk boy. He's about 12 and he sells milk, and he becomes, in Sherlock Holmes you have the Baker Street irregulars, this band of boys. So Venu has a little band of boys who helps both Inspector Ismail and Kaveri. They earn a bit of money in the process, and they help it because there are always boys on every street corner. Nobody pays attention to them. And they're again very intelligent. So that's where I'm exploring the the caste issues, the class issues, how they are often denied access to power or to any opportunities to make something of themselves. And how, on the other hand, Bangalore was what we call a cosmopolitan city where people helped each other. So relatively, people cut across caste and class and religion issues to form a bonding, and you'll see many stories that old Bangaloreans tell you. So I'm trying to weave in the idea of cooperation and
you had to do a lot of research, I'm sure, to get a feel and the settings of the old Bangaloreans.
So because a lot of my ecology research is set in old Bangalore, I had access. I've been collecting for about 15 years. So I have archival material like photographs and old newspaper records, but also gazette reports, speeches of the Maharaja, ledger files, and all kinds of letters, autobiographies, biographies.
Nice.
So there is, for instance, Bangalore was very interesting in the 1920s because there were so many women entrepreneurs. There was a lady called, they called her Coffee Pudi Sakama or Doddomane Sakama from Coorg. She was a child widow and then took over her husband's cousin's family. She adopted all the 10 kids because their father died. They were going to be wards of the state. Protected this massive coffee empire from being taken away, and then she set up a production factory in Bangalore and supplied to the Maharaja, a woman, a single woman by herself, right? And then there was a journalist called Kalyanamma who set up Makkal Kuta, was very, very famous as a woman journalist. She had a magazine called Saraswati. So when Vogue is discussing women's clothes and fashion, she's discussing things like wills and inheritance rights of women in India. Very fascinating women. And so we've woven either them directly or created characters as using them as inspiration. So all that is great fun,
your book also has setting in Bangalore and old Bangalore. So what draws you to the city? Like, what is it that you love about the city and what fascinates you?
See, I am such an old Bangalorean in the sense I've lived in many parts of the world. So lived in the US, lived in Europe, but always come back to Bangalore, and it's been my favorite city. It's the city I can't get out of my blood in that sense. And it's the city I've spent most of my adult life in. And what I really love is the lakes, the trees, the way people live with nature. It's what I call the cosmopolitan side of Bangalore because people are very accepting of any difference. I mean, again, it's not that differences don't exist, but relatively. Anyone who comes in, you come in from outside, people get absorbed by the city. It becomes their place, right? So I was very curious to understand how was the city in the 1920s, which for me was one of the best examples. It's what you call the golden age. It's between the First and Second World War, where women are fighting for the right to vote. Bangalore was one of the first, Mysore Kingdom was one of the first places in India where women got the right, A, to vote for the representative assembly members, and B, to be part of the representative assembly. So by 1923, women were part of the Mysore Representative Assembly along with men, you know. So I find that time very, very fascinating because there's something about the time period that led to all this vibrancy and this, you know, collective action, people merging together to solve problems. And that's what I'm trying to discover in the books.
And also, your setting is in the old 1920s, right? So, do you have this thing for history, for old-fashioned books?
I do, and I discovered that late in life. So when I was a kid in school, I hated history because it was all about memorization of dates, and I was very bad at it. I used to flunk history. Much later, I realized that I've always loved old recipes and food, and traditional recipes. So that is a lot in the Bangalore Detectives Club. Yeah, grandmother's recipes. And so the back of every Bangalore Detectives Club series, book in the series, has a set of recipes, which are old recipes modified for modern use. You know, you don't have to slave for 6 hours in the kitchen. So that, and then I've always been a fan of textiles and jewelry. So there's that woven in.
I can see with the...
But in addition, I think what I find when I write the books, I learn about, for instance, how Mysore as a princely state had a different trajectory to the independence movement. You know, so while in the 1920s, Bombay and Calcutta were very violently fighting, you know, about the early part of the independence movement, right? It was, I mean, Swaraj at that point was in the independence movement. The Mysore king protected his people from the worst atrocities of the British Empire, but he was also had to be emboldened to the British Empire. He was playing this delicate dance. And sometimes in the archival material, you get a sense of this. You know, there's a Gandhiji came to Bangalore. So Mirza Ismail gets a letter from the British commissioner saying, don't be so vocal in your praise about him. You know, so you see they're also negotiating these balances. And I've learned so much about, you read about the independence movement and you read about the prominent characters. And we don't know much about Karnataka's trajectory, right? So researching the book has helped me learn a lot about that. So it's always been very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the book was named a notable book of 2022 in New York.
Yeah.
How was that praise? How was it like to receive that praise?
It was fantastic. So I was complete novice to the fiction publishing world, and I had published non-fiction books before that, actually, so 2 books. But this one, so I had an agent who, we sold it to the Little Brown UK for world rights. So it had a publisher in the US, it had a publisher in the UK, in India, and then the world, right? It then came in, has this set of, so books of the week. So it got covered in the books of the week, which first of all was quite a bit, exciting thing for me. And then sometime in November, is a wrap-up of best books of the year. I didn't even know they did such things. So then my agent and my publisher sent me this news and I said, is it a big thing? And then they said, what do you mean, is it a big thing? And then I realized there are only 100 notable books of the year. And, you know, you get a little stamp that your publisher puts on the book. So it's really good feeling. And now, again, just last year, did a roundup of the 100 best books of the century. And in the Cozy Mystery set, there's only 6 and Bangalore Detectives Club is one of them. So that's big. It's been very nice.
What is your favorite work of 19th century detective fiction and why? And what are you reading at the moment? Just curious.
19th century would be Sherlock Holmes. 20th century would be Agatha Christie. And actually Kaveri cites them as inspiration a lot in her books. What am I reading now? I always read very widely. So I'm trying to think of what I'm reading. I'm going back to a lot of my Agatha Christie's to reread them. I am looking at Sherlock Holmes because I want to write something set in those times. So I'm looking at those. And in India, so there is a very interesting series called the Parveen Mistry series by Sujata Masse. She's of Indian origin but American, and she writes a series which is about it's inspired by India's first woman lawyer, but it's fictionalized based on her. It's a character set in the 1920s in Bombay. And I find it very interesting to look at, Parveen Mistry's journeys and Kaveri Murthy's journeys. So that's very, very interesting.
And if you had a choice, what would be your dream casting for the roles of Ramu, Kaveri, and the stranger who was murdered in the party?
Oh, this is so interesting. No one's ever asked me this. I think I'd go back to like people of olden days. I think I'd say Madhubala for Kaveri for sure. Maybe Gurudutt for Ramu because there's very much that kind of imagination that I have. When the Madhubala Gurudutt pairings were so iconic. And the guy who got murdered, maybe Satish Shah, who unfortunately passed away recently. But just does such a good job as a dead body, if you remember.
Absolutely. Yes.
Jani Bhi Do Yaro. In our house, we used to call him dead body because he was just such an iconic. I mean, how can anyone emote as a corpse and do it so
Yes.
well? Yeah, right? So
And how sensitive are you to reviews, critics of your own work?
that's a lovely question. So as an academic, the way you publish and research papers are the bread and butter of any academic's work, right?
True.
So you go through what you call anonymous peer review, as in what I write a paper, send it to a journal, and they send it to two expert reviewers who could be anywhere in the world, and they are anonymous, as in they know who I am, I don't know who they are,
Okay.
and they write back with these reviews, and sometimes reviews can be really brutal. I mean, even at sort of I've been doing academic research for close to 35 years now. One of my mentors was a Nobel Prize laureate, and she, after her Nobel Prize, would also get really brutal reviews. Sometimes, I mean, just to give you an example, I've got reviews that said, this author is trying to squeeze a paper from data like blood from a stone. They'll say things like that. Some won't, some will be very useful. So you learn very quickly to switch off the harshness and but take the real feedback, because sometimes in that blood from a stone awful thing also will be something you can use to improve your paper and make it better. And I'm always, you get trained like that, you know, to so I've become very good at, I read all my reviews, and there's a lot of, like, some people are harsh, some people are very kind. I look at mostly, is there something that I can take away that will improve the quality of my writing, and the rest I leave. It's been useful. I find many people, I mean, having this thick skin is really useful.
Yeah, no, and also it's scope for improvement, right?
Right, because even with see, there will be people who say, I don't like the story because I don't like these kinds of stories. And what can you do? That's fine. That's absolutely
not
fine.
A genre,
But if they say, I don't like it because this part felt boring to me, or that part was too grim for me, it's not necessary that I will change it for one person, but it'll make me think a little bit. And maybe over time that improves.
And where, when, and how do you like to write?
Ideally, I would just like days where I do nothing but writing. But in my job and home front, it's a luxury I don't have. Okay, so I have a teen daughter at home. I have an elderly mother living with me. So the family is there. There's work which is very intense. There's other things going on in life always, and my family likes some time with me also, apart from just the sort of basic duties. So I would say it's really when I get time, where I get time. I write because because of the academic nature of work, I'm always writing some non-fiction, an academic paper, editing a student report. Once I do non-fiction, I can't write fiction. Because the fiction is a very slow, creative, you have to have multiple threads, and the non-fiction is very linear, spare, and you have a single thread and you're very clear about it. And too much clarity in the fiction, it spoils the beauty, right? I mean, you have to have that sort of more poetic. So what I would do is typically write my fiction early in the morning before I leave for work, or come back, do other things, and maybe late at night at 10:30 sit down and get back to my fiction.
With coffee or something?
With coffee, always with coffee, yes.
And is there a piece of writing advice that's really stuck with you?
The one thing that there have been many things along the way, but I think the thing that has stayed with me is write for yourself. At the end of the day, if I think back, I'm now doing book 9, 4 fiction, 4 non-fiction. And I think I can see the difference where I have enjoyed the writing. Many years later, people tell me that they enjoy the reading. And where there have been parts where I sort of pushed myself through, I had a deadline, this chapter was kind of dull and dragging me down. I felt in the end I did a decent job. Many years later, when I look back, the fact that I didn't want to write it, it shows in the writing. So I think write for yourself. If you enjoy the writing, people will enjoy it.
So in your latest book, Into the Leopard's Den, how did you balance historical accuracy with creative storytelling?
So I did some movement. I mean, see, broadly the strands are fine because there was a lot of human-animal conflict. The British were taking over a lot of plantations. They'd done this already in Sri Lanka, and they were moving to India, where there were local ways of managing with shade-grown coffee, which wasn't as productive, but it was in line with the landscape and not so destructive of nature. Then they came in for extra productivity. They cut down all the trees and said coffee will be more productive if it directly gets the sunlight. It was, but then the lantana, which is the invasive weed, came in, and the borer insect came in, and that decimated all the coffee plantations. And so there was a huge crash. So I've taken some of what happened, and they were doing it in Coorg, but I took a lot of the lessons from Sri Lanka and brought them to Coorg. So that kind of slightly, it happened, but maybe not at the scale that I talked about it. And I took some liberties. Like for me, a train station is a part of the story. So I created a Markara in those days, train station. But I explained in the historical note that there even now is no train station is something that I created. And some things I took, the independence movement was moving in, quite active in Coorg, and there was a magazine that they had, so I've used snippets from the magazine in there. So it's a mix of imagination, but when I deviate a lot from reality, I mention it in the historical note. This part is my imagination. This part comes from reality.
Very nice.
Yeah.
How long did you take to write that?
I'm doing a book a year now, so I'm on that contract, but it takes me about a 4-month period to write the first draft. And then second, third drafts, fourth drafts happen over the next 3-4 months, and then it goes up.
Okay. And I noticed that it's very colorful, the
covers.
Yeah.
No, I love the cover designs. I am very bad artistically. They send it to me and I kind of give tweaks, but the designs are the publishers.
So from writing to ecologist, how did your interest in climate change and sustainability start? What led to it?
So it started, I am a great believer in serendipity, and so it started in a very, if I trace it back to childhood roots without my realizing it, so I'm a child of the city. I grew up in Delhi till I was 10 and then in Bangalore after that.
And I know your grandfathers used to take you for a walk in the...
My father and mother used to take me for a walk in the city. My father was a very brisk walker, so we would go for like long kilometers long, like 1-hour walks, and very briskly walk through everything. But we would stop in Delhi to Deer Park, and even in Lal Bagh those days we used to have deer. So we would feed the deer with grass, those kind of things. My mother had a botany degree, so she would take apart the flowers. We would go for again 1 hour, but we wouldn't cover much ground because we were always opening up flowers and looking at leaves, and she was trying to explain to me the classification system. And then I went and did a BSc in microbiology, chemistry and zoology because I hated plants because I couldn't draw. I'm very bad at drawing. So botany you have to sketch. And it's ironic that I came back to studying trees later. I didn't hate plants. I hated the idea of doing botany of the drawing. You know? And even zoology, I had to bribe my classmates to do sketches for me in the lab book and buy them a samosa and chai for them to draw my lizard or whatever. Right? It wouldn't look. But then I joined the Indian Institute of Science for an integrated PhD in biological sciences, and I was the first batch. And where you had to do the first 2 years for the master's section of the PhD, you would work in all the departments and you could select one. One department was the ecological sciences. The other 6 were in some way molecular, developmental biology, microbiology, biochemistry, biophysics, all to do with molecular stuff. And that's what I had read for my undergraduate degree. So I started working in the lab. And then I found I absolutely hated the lab work. I still love reading about microbiology as just an interest. But you get into the lab at 6 in the morning, you leave at midnight, and you haven't seen anything and your experiments don't work sometimes. So I was ready to quit. And then my PhD advisor was Madhav Gadgil, who was of course one of India's best known ecologists. I didn't know he was famous then. I didn't know anything about biodiversity or wildlife. I went to hear someone else give a talk in a workshop and they were running late. So he spoke, but he spoke about 2 things that moved me a lot. He said that we need to do science that is relevant to the country. Because everyone does this imported science which is not relevant to what India needs. And the second thing he talked about was doing low-cost science. And the thing I was getting troubled with was a lot of the molecular biology I was doing was very expensive. The reagents were expensive, the experiments were expensive, and when something failed, I felt like I'm wasting someone else's money, taxpayer money, government money. And so he spoke about these 2 things, and it sort of rekindled my interest in science. And then I went to him completely out of the blue and said, I want to work with you. And he was nice enough to take me on. And then I started from scratch because no training in ecology. I did satellite remote sensing. I had to do computer coding. I had to learn statistics. So it was all sort of, he and I would sit with books and I would pick it up. But he was a wonderful, wonderful mentor. And because of, I think what that's taught us, for instance, that opportunity, now at Azim Premji University, we allow students to come in from any program to any program. We have a BSc and an MSc. And you can come into the BSc Environmental Science with a degree in Humanities. You can come to MSc Climate Science and a degree in Humanities or Social Science or Architecture or Engineering. And I think a lot of it comes from many of us in the university. We've had these experiences, and because of someone allowing us to make this shift, we are in a place where we're happy. And I think sometimes in India we are very rigid. We say by the 10th, 11th, you need to know if you want science or
yeah.
social science. How do you know?
Yeah, not all knows.
You don't,
Not
everyone will
everyone knows.
not know.
Yeah.
And then we say, you can't get hired in something unless your other degree is there. You can't get a PhD
Too much
in
pressure.
It's too much pressure. For little children,
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's how
Wonderful.
I got into ecology. But then I finished my PhD in ecology
Okay.
in 98, and then I moved to Indiana University in 99 and 2000 to work with Eleanor Ostrom, who was later the first woman to get the Nobel Prize in economics. And from her, I started learning the importance of looking at governance and social science, because for any ecology, you can't just look at the science. Why do people do what they do? You need to understand behavior, institutions, social science.
The relationships.
Yeah, the relationships. So now my work has a lot of social science also. And again, it's serendipity. If I hadn't made my way to Indiana University, hadn't had the privilege of working with Eleanor Ostrom, this wouldn't have come in. So I think one should be sort of open to life and see what comes and where it takes you.
Nice to know that. So, and how has your collaboration with Seema Mandoli enriched your writing and research on Indian cities and trees?
Well, that's So without Seema, I think so much of this work wouldn't have been done. Seema and I met in 2013. She had worked, she worked in the corporate world for a long time with a business degree, and then moved to volunteering first with conservation organizations and working in conservation full time. So she's worked. She did a lot of work during the tsunami with the Andaman Islands. Before that, she's worked with crocodiles and turtles, and in the university now, for instance, works with our student group, which does a lot of work with campus dogs and making sure that there's reduced conflict between the dogs. And so she's really a very much animal person and ecology person in a very experiential way, from when she was a kid climbing trees, eating mangoes from trees. And she, much later in life, came back to do a master's degree in development at Azim University. So we first met when she did her master's project with me. And then over time has become my colleague. It's been a very interesting, lovely journey that way. And when we talk about books, the collaboration is really good, because we come up with a list and we're looking at things in our conversations which merge the personal and the professional. Like when we wrote Cities and Canopies, Trees in Indian Cities, I don't think Nature in the City is much more a science book. But when we sat, Seema, which is my own book, when Seema and I sat down for Cities and Canopies, we started saying, let's look at our grandmother's recipe for hair oil. Or let's look at riddles and puzzles. Or let's look at playing games. When we were kids, we used to take those sepals of the gulmohar tree and make these nails that you play with. We used to call them asura nails and scare each other. Or, clothes and artifacts you can make games from these toys from coconut fronds. So it became a very experiential book. And so that's the kind of collaborations that I have with Seema. Even now they're the most fruitful collaborations. We have written illustrated books, we're doing cartoons, we're doing books for children. It's a range. I think sometimes when you find the person that it works with, it's very nice, because when we write also, I'm not sure if I would have this experience with anyone else, but when we write,
to connect on the same
and when we do a book, she'll do half the chapters the first draft, I do half the chapters the first draft, and we exchange. And by the end, we are not sure who's written what, because we've edited each other's work so much. It works really well. I think when you find that, you're very fortunate, that's all.
And what is your favorite tree in the city? Do you have a favorite tree?
Yes, banyan. I just love the banyan tree because they're so large, they're giants. We have one on the Sarjapur Attibele road, sort of near where I live. And the locals say it's 300 plus years old. It's like magic. You walk in and it's like this grove which is timeless. You think it has seen, Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan, it's seen the British, it's seen maybe Shahji and the Mughals, and you don't know what all this tree has seen. And you're standing in the same tree. It really gives you goosebumps.
Also, I went through Cubbon Park and I went through with the tourist guide, and he was telling me that these trees, like you said, 300 years old, and also some of them were brought by the British from South America, so they're natives too. And they're so lovely, it's
again, Bangalore is this melting pot really of everything.
And you've written over 200 academic papers and numerous books. So how do you decide which idea becomes a scientific paper, a novel, or an article? What is it?
We try and do a bit of everything with everything. So if the way we've always done it is if we have a scientific paper, we try and write one popular piece from it for a newspaper or whatever.
Okay.
And then we also talk to media and media covers it. And there's
Okay.
differences. We would cover it from one way in the popular piece and media would cover it from a different way. And I think both are equally important for it
different
to be
perspectives,
different perspectives to be out there. We try and do something else now. We're trying to see if we could do short videos or a cartoon book. So one of the things, actually that is how Seema and our collaboration began.
Okay.
So one of the things she did for her master's thesis was to look at Gundatops. Gundatops are these village wooded groves which are across Karnataka, and they would typically be used by villagers for cattle would graze. It gives you shade, so it's a community space for festivals and all of those things. It will give you fruits, mango, tamarind, 1 or 2 sacred trees would be there. So it's a really village commons place.
Okay.
And when we looked at it in the Sarjapur area, there were 49 or something like that. Around that number of Gundatops in the Sarjapur area that we were looking at, and only 3 of them were still there, as in some trees were there. 2 had become garbage dumps, and 1 the village had protected and was re-landscaping as a park. So we said, this is a huge change. Let's write something that we can take back to the communities. So we had the papers. That's that. And then we said, what we thought of a policy brief, but what will a village community look at us as policy brief? We wrote a little story about, a woman from the village who's moved away, and Lakshmamma, and Maranna is this one tree which survives in the grove, a banyan. Okay, so Lakshmamma and Maranna have a conversation. Our students illustrated this. We created a little story, and English on one side, Kannada on one side. And we had done policy briefs before, but this turned out to be even more useful because the Karnataka, Uma Mahadevan, who's of course with the Karnataka government, was then in charge of Panchayat libraries, and she asked us for 6,400 print copies to be placed in every Panchayat library because it's Kannada and English, and the kids can read it. Then the government issued a government order saying that MNREGA funds should be used in every village to restore the Gundatops. So huge policy impact, but for something, which is a story, and then you realize the importance of storytelling.
Absolutely.
Academics, I think we are so trained to write something that is very boring, if I can say so. Scientific data has to be so rigorous. We don't want the fancy titles. And we have to have some way of merging scientific rigor with good storytelling.
Absolutely. I think small kids and in age of social media, visuals really work.
really work.
So in your opinion, what are the untold or underrepresented ecological stories from Indian cities that should be explored more?
I think the sacredness is really, really important because if you look at the way in which India does urban conservation, which is very different from other cities, is the fact that even in the heart of the city, you will see a sacred tree, a peepal or a banyan and a neem next to it, a platform, and these are keystone species. And you will see that, or you go to whether it could be a dargah, it could be a Jain temple, it could be a church, a cemetery, cemeteries of all faiths. You will see incredible biodiversity which is sacred and protected. It could be an anthill, could be a bat's nest, it could be whatever else. And all our religious faiths and traditions have this very syncretic ability to connect with nature. Some element of nature is very, very important, right? And that is why I think people naturally tend to protect nature. Because if you look at a lot of the villages in the Bangalore area, there's always Munishwara. And we call Munishwara Shiva now, but Munishwara was very much a local deity of the soil. And he has 7 sisters. And the sisters are different. There's Chaudeshwari, there is Dugalama. Dugalama is the goddess of the water. Chaudeshwari likes trees. There's another goddess who doesn't like trees but likes people. So so there is this ecology which is related to nature, and around that they conserve nature. Even the goddesses are people and they have kin relationships to them, and they're part of nature. So when you protect nature, you protect the gods. And I think that is our tradition, that we have a unique path. That's why India is so densely populated, but yet you will see nature survives and thrives even in the most populated parts of the country, right? So I think that's something that we really, we don't talk about very much.
So using remote sensing, did it teach you something unique about nature that fieldwork couldn't? And when you finally got to the fieldwork, did it change the way you looked at all satellite images that you'd studied? What was it like?
You're asking me a really good question. I've never been asked this. I would say, so when I moved to ecology, I read about this field called landscape ecology, which is basically the ecology of looking at things spatially. Not one tree or one forest, but how are they interconnected with each other. When I saw things through remote sensing, it made me see India in a very, very different light. I was looking at the Western Ghats, and you really get to see how, for instance, in Kerala, Rubber plantations coexist with the forest, which coexist with small towns, which coexist with sacred groves, and this mixture of everything is where species move around. And otherwise, if you're in a plantation, you only see the plantation. If you're in the forest, you only see the forest.
Yeah.
And you don't understand birds and animals are constantly moving from one place to another. And then you understand things like, let's say you have elephants entering a tea plantation. Where else will they go? Because that's their path. And how, if you make certain modifications to the structure of the plantation along that route, the elephants can also pass. They're not going to destroy things in your tea plantation, and
makes sense
it
to
all
me.
makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
you see that spatially. But the thing with all of this remote sensing is it requires what you call ground truthing, because if you're not on the ground,
Yes.
you don't know why things have
Yeah,
changed.
yeah.
So in Nepal, we did this very interesting study. It was in 2003 we published a paper. But so first time I went to Nepal. Before that, I had done this landscape study of what had happened in Nepal around the Chitwan National Park over a 20-year period. And we said we'll look at positive anomalies. That is, we know that overall people say Nepal's forests were degrading.
Yeah.
Where are the places in this 20-year period where forests have regrown using remote sensing? So we call them positive anomalies. We went to the ground to find out why they have changed.
Yeah.
So it's a large landscape, but you're guided because you know
Yeah.
exactly where you're going because of the remote sensing. And then we found the completely different reasons. One place is a private plantation. Some guy wants to grow timber and he's a very powerful local guy. So he doesn't live there. It's his plantation, but no one will touch it because even though he lives in the far off city, he's so well known in the area, he wouldn't dare to touch his plantations. One place was community forests, and the community has got together and they're the local indigenous community, and they're managing their forests because they have talked to the government and got rights over protecting it, and they can use it for tourism. A third one was a UNDP funded project, so it's completely international funding which is going into conservation. Very top down. Top down, bottom up, private. You get the entire gamut of things. And so that to me is very interesting. It's what we call people and pixels. The pixel is a remote sensing, but you need to understand the people.
Absolutely.
So that's the combination.
Thank you for clarifying that. I was just thinking a lot about it last night.
It is a really interesting question. I haven't been asked this for
No, I mean, it's just that, I don't think technology can ever truly replace the feeling of being in nature, right?
Exactly. But it gives you access at one shot to see what's going on because you can't cover everything on foot, especially in the country of the size of India.
So many researchers find fieldwork very intimidating, especially for women at that time when you started off. What made you step into that space despite the challenges?
So I have friends and colleagues who are ecologists who are women who've gone into areas which are really remote, and I think I have tremendous admiration for their work. I think a lot of India is so densely inhabited, there are always people in some places, and then it's very easy because especially if you go to rural communities, well, not always, but in the south of India, let me make a general comment, most places are safe. And then every time, as a principle of my work, we always make sure that we work with someone who is locally well established. Let's say there's a local NGO or local community group.
So
you don't want to do parachuting research. You come in, you don't understand how people live if you're just there for some time. So we already have those local contacts and then you're safe. But it's something I keep in mind a lot now with my students who are women and younger people who work with me who are women. Sadly, to say that in the cities I'm a little more worried than in the rural areas. Because again, I think most of India, actually rural India is very safe. Again, you can't make a general comment, but cities are sometimes so unsafe. I'll give you an example. Two of my students, we were doing this mapping of old wells. We had this old map from the 1880s, and we had Bangalore had, especially central Bangalore, a lot of these open wells, and we were trying to track them. So these girls were there and they were looking for, they're on a road. There is a large sheet and there is a construction site, and inside the construction, so they were looking for the well, and then they peeped around to ask, and somebody said, come in, and they went in. Nothing happened to them. Maybe nothing would have happened. But they suddenly realized they were on the other side of this large metal sheet in a large construction site with no women in sight. And they were saying, go inside and see, it's there. And then one of them had suddenly it's 12:30 in the afternoon, but nobody can see what's going on. To say, we'll come in a second, we just left our pen there. And then they went back. And then she pulled her away, and then we said, okay. Then we sent a team of boys after that. And we found, but it was a bit scary. So even it could be just a split second and the wrong decision in the... So cities I'm always very scared about.
But are there any precautions or systems that help?
Go in groups. We always do that. So go in groups and then it's fine, I think. Yeah, and go in groups, and you need to know the city. Again, it's very important to. So, for instance, I've had students in Delhi, a student who was working in parks in Delhi, and it was very interesting because she was doing a PhD on parks, but she had to take her husband everywhere, which is not something at all I would think in Bangalore. If you have like lots of people, you just go into parks, and we have done all our studies. That there, you go alone.
Yeah.
But in Delhi, you had to go with, she had to always take her husband with her. In a park in daylight with lots of people around.
Yeah.
So it changes from city to city also.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not something that I have done by choice, but I think a lot of young women doing ecology tend to seek out other women to work with. And this I've seen consistently, maybe because you feel more comfortable. So most of my students have been women.
Yeah.
But they are far better at doing the people work because people tend to open up. Let's say, think of yourself. If you're in a park and a boy walks up to you, it's our reverse gender bias, right?
Yeah.
And he starts asking you a bunch of questions about who you are, where are you from, and then eventually gets to people and nature. By then you're saying, who are you? I don't want to talk to you. If a young woman comes up to you with a survey saying you're much more open, they get better responses. And we've done, for instance, oral histories where we have talked to middle-aged women who live around lakes and elderly women to share songs of the lakes. And they will sing when their husbands are not there or the sons are not there, because they say they don't like us to sing to outsiders. But they will sing for a woman and they will not sing for a man. So it's the advantages also of having a woman to do this kind of work.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. And how did combining satellite data and field work change your understanding of the relationship between people and environment, human and climate? Because there is, you spoke about it earlier also.
With satellite images, you get to see time in the past. So that's the advantage also, because 40 years ago, how was the place? Where did it look? Where was the lake? In the Gundutop work, for instance, that we told you about, when Seema was talking to people in the village, you can see there are 3 Gundutops where we have from survey records. Here's a map. We don't have the map. We have the survey records which say that in survey number X, there was a Gundutop and there were 3. And nobody knows about them. They say, no, there were never such things. We didn't have them in the village. Till you eventually find one elderly person who tells you, and then that's when you really need the satellite images. It gives you that long perspective over time, at least 40, 50 years. So there's that it's been giving us. And I think, but from the people side, you get a sense really of how people have respected nature so much. Again, I'll give you an example of Divya Gopal was one of my master's students, and for her thesis she was saying, why does no one look at slums or informal settlements? We're always looking at home gardens, saying home gardens are the wealthy. And then when she started looking at the informal settlements, the biodiversity there is incredible. People have no space, they have no water. In some aluminium shed, they're using battery cans and old paint and, old paint cans and old vessels that are broken. And in that they're growing tulsi and ginger and all kinds of things. Rare, beautiful flowers. So proud of them, there's lovely biodiversity in those homes, and they do so much with such little. That is what sort of I think is the
Jugaad.
The Jugaad. There was a lake, an informal settlement near a lake. She had a lovely garden. 3 years later, I went back with a woman from the press who wanted to cover the gardens. She'd seen a story of mine. She wanted to profile them. This lady's garden had disappeared because the road got widened and took it away. So I said, let's go to the house. We talked to her, and she had 5 pots with tulsi. I said, why do you have 5 pots with tulsi? Because, she said, no, I prepared them with, when I lost the garden, I put all the manure, and then I went to visit my married daughter. I came back and the tulsi seeds had blown in. And it's Atiti Devodbhava, uninvited guest, but it's a guest. And I was thinking, this generosity. In my garden, if I have 5 tulsi, I'll pull out 4 and I'll plant something else I want, right? I don't have her generosity. And I have a large garden. She only has those 5 pots. So that I think is what is these wherever you go, you'll find an inspiring story like this, and it sort of keeps you going.
Lovely. So your research also highlights how local communities contribute to conservation. So how important is community engagement and science outreach in achieving goals and mitigating the effects of climate change and human activity on forests? And also if there's any memorable moment that you can share from your experiences.
So we have always, especially at Azim Premji University, invested a lot in climate communication for young people because that's a big focus of the university. This is Barack Obama's famous sentence that the generation to come, the generation of youth, are the ones who have done the least to cause the problems of climate change, but will have to do the most to counteract the effects. They'll face the effects most severely. So we have to really work with that generation. We have to work with them with a sense of positivity in our communication, not false positivity, but real positivity. Because when we teach our BSc and MSc students, we find that so much of what is going on around us is negative. In terms of climate change, biodiversity collapse, plastics in the ocean, everything you can think of, pollution. And then they get very depressed, and then that's not very helpful because they're not going to do anything, and they're so young, you don't want them depressed. So we started thinking of, since you're here in the university, we're in the middle of our annual climate festival. And this is the 4th edition. Our theme this year is Coasts and Oceans of Life. We get young student interns to go across the country for an entire year. It's a large team. We get applications and we send about 50, 60, sometimes 100 people across India, and they document stories and come back. Then we have art interns. There's a boy who's made lovely boats out of cardboard. There is one who's done a marine fish tank and a freshwater fish tank to show people the differences, that kind. Then there's a former student of ours who's now teacher in a government school, Ramgondanhalli government school here. And he brought the kids to do this play just now, which is called Kone Mino, which is the last fish. And it's such a beautiful play by little kids, 4th to 6th standard, on this girl who goes to the ocean and enjoys playing with the fish, but eventually is down to the last fish, who is taken away by traders because they say you have one fish left, you can buy it for 2 lakh rupees. So she's got capitalism, she's got consumption, everything.
Oh, lovely.
So
I'm
beautiful.
amazed.
And the children in the auditorium were simply, it's just quiet looking at this because it's other children acting. So this is something we have learned. That you need to convey it. Well, the reality is sometimes a negative message, but otherwise we talk a lot about beauty and people doing action to protect things. So what can you do is the message we want them to walk away with. And the second thing we've realized is people like us, we're all old from the perspective of young children, right? We come across as preaching to them, and maybe we slip into preaching without realizing it. Whereas when young interns tell other young people, you can see a complete difference. They're looking at them thinking, I could be there. If she has done this, she's gone here and documented this, I need to go do something like that. So very inspirational in a way that we can't be. Right? So I think these are our 2 basic principles. Something for the young, by the young, where we are in the background, maybe the Sutradas, but kind of out of the way, out of the visibility. And then doing it in a way that inspires hope, because I think that's really, really important.
So what would you like us to know about your research that you've done so far, technologies being developed, and the current threat to climate change? Also talk to us about the importance of advancing science, the important stuff you've done specifically, like is it like identifying trees, their species names, and how are you applying these sciences for solutions?
I started my career as a forest ecologist.
Yes, I read that.
And I did that from, let's say, the 92 onwards till about 2006-07. And then when I started working on urban ecology, it was more as a resident of the city, not as a scientist. But slowly I started realizing there's so much that we don't know which technology can play a role. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we started with was looking at Jayanagar, the metro project, and it was going to take some trees. How many trees were there before? And how have the trees in Bangalore changed over time? We don't have the data. And there are so many ways you could use this kind of technology, GPS-based technology, to understand what things are. Now you have apps that can tell you how to identify species. So one of the things we have been doing over time is trying to understand how can we quantify the benefits of trees in Bangalore. And that's where technology can play a huge role. For instance, we did some work with air samplers, and what you do is you can suck polluted air for 24 hours, and a simple thing like having a tree on a street reduces the kind of pollution in the air, the suspended particulate matter, by 90%. Just having trees on the road.
Wow.
And which means it takes it from dangerous levels to being unable to breathe to being able to breathe. And of course, look, it's not going to clear all pollutants, so nitrous oxide, some other kinds of things, which it will reduce them. It does, but maybe not as dramatically as it sucks away the dust in the dirt. But that is something we can really test, and what species are better at it, you can look at that. Then how do these trees survive over time? What's the stress to the xylem and phloem? How old are our trees in Bangalore? We don't know. So one of my colleagues, Prachi, now has a grant to look at using wood corers. You can actually core a sample from the center of the tree, which is the oldest part of the trees in the center, and put it through carbon dating. to understand how old are some of these heritage trees.
Interesting.
And maybe if they actually are 300-400 years old, we should get them heritage tree status and say
Yeah.
you can't just cut them for a road widening or flyover and say
Yeah.
you're going to replace them with compensatory afforestation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because how can you compensate for a
Yeah.
300-year-old
Yeah.
tree? And so those kinds of things, that's where we're trying to use technology.
Yeah.
We're also setting up a very large, not very large, a very well-equipped environmental science lab here.
Okay.
We have some outdoor equipment like we have a weather station. But India also has a number of emerging toxics and environmental contaminants. So they're in all our lakes, in the air, and we don't know what these are. And we need to study these better. So we are hoping that with this kind of a lab, we have large batches of BSc Environmental Science and Sustainability and an MSc in Climate Change and Sustainability.
Okay.
And they learn about water and air pollution, climate.
Mhm.
They learn about carbon sequestration of a tree. So if you have a stretch of trees that is being removed for felling, how is that going to contribute to climate change? Because these trees have sequestered some carbon and that's going to go, right? So what is their carbon mitigation potential that you've lost? Students will be able to calculate all of these using technology. And that's something we think is very important because let's say you're training hundreds of students every year that pass out. Over 10 years, that's going to really create a capacity base in the country, right? So that's the hope.
What is it like to make a career out of climate science? What do you wish the average people knew about the life and career of a climate scientist? Also talk to us about the burdens on a climate scientist and what you've been facing.
I think in terms of career opportunities, it's never been better. I wish in some sense, it's sad to have to say this, it's never been better because there's so many environmental challenges that we see in front of us. And I think climate change is no longer a distant future threat. We know we are in the middle of the climate crisis with heat waves and typhoons and hurricanes and all kinds of things across the world, wherever you are, landslides, global, this glacial lake,
Forest fires,
forest fires, the GLOFs, the glacial lake outbursts. We see this everywhere, and so we know that we need to work to solve it everywhere. It could be companies, because every company needs now a chief sustainability officer, but each company also needs to do its own life cycle analysis and sustainability metrics and reporting. And so there are, aspects there that they could do. There are a lot of companies that look to do offsets of their carbon footprint through compensatory planting, which can sometimes be very damaging, both to society and to ecology, And so you need to know how to do this well by restoration of ecology and not by, planting trees, let's say, on riverbeds. You need to have, for instance, a lot of environmental pollution analysis, like I was telling you. People who are toxicologists will be hugely in demand. There's a lot of public health issues that environmental science can work with. Climate science can do a lot of work with conservation, because I think in terms of India's conservation strategies, we are not thinking of climate change. And something as simple as classrooms. How are classrooms going to function in a time of heat? How do you heat-proof classrooms across the country? So these are really, just an example of the range of things that are open. I think people are now realizing we have, I'll take our MSc Climate Change and Sustainability, for instance. The first batch is now going on. We have some very fresh graduates who are from, like I said, humanities, architecture, engineering, agricultural sciences, environmental science, so many different kinds of things. There's at least like 7-8 different backgrounds that they come from. And some of them have had incredible work experience. Some have worked in one woman worked in the waste sector for 15 years. A gentleman has worked in the energy sector for 30 years. Another woman has a PhD and set up, worked with 2 startups who've done drone technologies. And they have moved to doing a sustainability master's for personal motives. For instance, one is a vegan. One has been working with waste and wants to set up something that is larger than what she's been working on. One wants a bigger picture. The careers that are opening, not just for people who are taking careers which are, working with someone, but to set up your own companies and to set up startups of various kinds. I think the door is wide open. What are the challenges? I think the fact that it's an all-consuming career and it's for someone who's an optimist, I get very worried at times. And I think we're all in this, in the midst of climate despair. You see so much changing around you and you see it constantly changing. So that can be really, really, really worrisome. And so finding the optimism, I think, comes from the young.
True. So last 2-3 years, we witnessed many extreme weather events, right? Like heat waves, wildfires, floods. Should we be expecting more of this in 2026? What is your thought?
We should expect much more. I think the thing is we should start expecting the unpredictable. And climate change is really, what worries me is it's not that, people say we can't predict, so how are we sure? But the point is we are entering the world of the unknowable.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe can't even anticipate some of the things that we'll see in the future.
Yeah.
One thing is sure, that extreme events are going to become the norm. Bangalore floods, the school goes online for 2-3 days and then it comes back. So that's the kind of thing we have to think of. It also has to be things like when you plan your holidays. If you're in the forest during the summer, don't go, because it could be a forest fire.
Yeah.
If you're in the hills during the rainy season, don't go in the monsoon. But what does that mean for the people who live there? I think that's the harder, challenging part, because they're going to be there and they can't. I mean, you saw Uttarakhand, parts of the place just washing away in a few minutes. I think that is what we're going to see. And we really have to think about the fact that climate change is a disaster that is unpredictable, but we are planning our infrastructure. And India is growing its infrastructure now for the predictable. So how does India plan its infrastructure? Not to interfere with the ecology and to cut away hillsides and make them, for instance, more exposed to landslides, because there will come rains and they will be unpredictable. But also, how do you make the infrastructure that the country needs, because the country needs infrastructure, in a way that is climate resilient? We haven't thought this through, and we need to really be thinking this through.
Absolutely. Even the current cyclone hitting Andhra Pradesh, Chennai, every year it happens, and still some people are, dying and suffering.
And we're still thinking only, I think, in terms of our emergency and evacuation services, which are really good. But we also need to think about
infrastructure.
Infrastructure. How to rethink of infrastructure. We can't be doing business as usual infrastructure. We can't not do infrastructure, so we have to do it right.
Also, sometimes you see policies like green firecrackers or odd even traffic rules that sound eco-friendly, but don't seem to change anything much in the bigger picture. So what kind of action do you think really moves the needle for cleaner air in cities like Delhi, which still ranks the most polluted in the world? Is there really such a thing as an eco-friendly explosion? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I don't think so. I mean, that's not my area of work. But I think what you need to do is have stricter enforcement of policies to begin with. You can't have the level, if you have people living there, you can't have this level of explosion, of pollution. And therefore, what you need is a systemic thing, an answer. So, for instance, let's say Delhi stopped polluting industries within Delhi, but then they move outside and you're in a neighboring state's limits. Or let's say Punjab, you blame the farmers for burning the stubble. But there's so much else, because of the water scarcity, Punjab government asked them to push back the planting cycle, which means you have to get rid of the stubble before. So what are you providing the farmers as an alternative? When you say they shouldn't, how else are they going to manage their fields? So I think we have not thought this through systemically. There will be the stubble, there will be the crackers, and what do you do with all of this? At the end, what we need is we have across the country really good environmental policies by and large. What we lack is enforcement. And we lack enforcement because of the lack of, sometimes I'd say, political will. So what can we as citizens do? Our politicians listen to us when we get onto the streets. They don't listen to email campaigns, they don't listen to signature campaigns. But if people are on the streets protesting, then they pay attention. And India, over time, we've stopped that tradition of non-violent, peaceful protests on the street. Politicians listen to that. I mean, in Bangalore also, whenever there was an idea, plan to cut down trees for a steel flyover. And then there was this large movement.
Priya
Chetty, right? Steel flyover Beda. And the steel flyover Beda was successful partly because of the social media, but also because they managed to get people on the streets. And then all the letters to the politicians, and then they actually cancel the project. So that's what you need.
Engaging the next generations, how are you thinking of training them? How do you inculcate a sense of accountability regarding sustainability in young scientists? What do you hope students in your university take away from your researches, your programs, and what is it that we can do?
One thing is, we think we need to instill a sense of, let's say, love for the environment or passion. But young people come with their passions, and that's something we've seen a lot. Very often they become cynical or despondent or both. Cynical as in, and I think it's problem of people like us who, tell them typically if, parents or older people or something, you need to make money, all of this is fine, and, you need to get a job, you need to move ahead, somebody else will take care of this, first you look out for yourself. So I think that we need to let the cynicism aside. The second thing is we need to teach them, if anything, how to work in groups. Because one thing we see with the students, they always want to do something with groups, and one of the first struggles they have is, this person in my group I can't work with in a project. And then you have to tell them, in real life, if you can't work in a collective, nothing else will, nothing will get it.
Along.
You have to take people along, right? So that's one of the biggest things. We do a lot of, this is across the university, not just in environmental science. Our pedagogies are, a lot of our grading and assessment is forcibly through group projects, and we will decide the groups, you don't decide the groups. So you have to learn how to get along. And then you realize over time the diversity is such a strength, because when you work with someone not like you, you get a lot of new ideas. Right? So that's one thing. In terms of how one of the things we found very successful is getting them exposed to real life contexts and communities and people on the ground. So in all our courses, and again this is across the university, not just the environmental science, is we have our pedagogy, which is a lot of field practicum. So in every course, as far as possible, we'll try to take them to the field. And then there are internships and research projects where they spend a lot of time outside. I think when they're doing something with their hands, so to speak,
and occupied,
that is, occupied, no, but it transforms their imagination. When you see people and how they live in everyday work with nature or affected by nature, that is what I think at the end motivates them. And often these are city kids, so otherwise they've never exposed to that kind of thing. And city kids especially, I think, middle and upper middle class now, we all end up living in bubbles. You don't meet anybody not like you. And so that is what the field exposure breaks, that bubble.
But it's hard to make that change, I feel, no?
Yeah, it is hard, and that's why we have to make it part of the pedagogy itself. It's one of our, principles of pedagogy that we write into all our documents, and we must send them into the field.
And what tools do you think education system should use effectively to transform themselves in response to climate change? How could education system increase awareness of climate change? Are there any tips?
I think across, if you're just aware of your environment around, I think you could, especially when you're young, you should teach everything in relation to the environment around you. So the physics that you study, for instance, could be looking at the shapes of leaves and saying why, or the trees and saying why they are in this way. Mathematics, you could look at fractal patterns this way. Right? Biology, obviously it's very obvious that you would look around the environment. But English, for instance, you could look at poetry around nature and then get, there's so many good colleges, like Christ University now or the Isaac Trivandrum have these courses in environmental literature, which for the literature students is very open into the environment. And now we see many students eventually turning up to the environment originally coming through literature, right? Or let's say law. If you're looking at law, how do you... So I think every aspect of education is linked to the environment around you. And if you make the connections to that on a very experiential, emotional level, that's one thing. The other thing I think we found very useful is bringing art and the humanities into classrooms. Because we're just studying the science, you don't get the emotional connect. That Kone we know that I was telling you, the play is a very good example of that. When you see it, you react to the idea of ocean plastics in a way that you will never react to statistics. You need the statistics also.
Just the line, the last fish is so sinking. Right?
Exactly. You really have to think of it. And the kids came up with the line. The kids have scripted this play. So.
Lastly, with such a rich and multifaceted career, what remains your biggest curiosity or driving question when you wake up in the morning?
What makes me happy is a day that I have learned something new. So some days, the day is just so full of things. I've just been running to keep in the same place and I haven't learned anything new. And then I get frustrated. But what makes me look forward is if it's a day where I'm learning something. And typically climate change is related to so many different aspects.
It's huge.
Most of the days I'm learning something new, either in the classroom from the students or putting together curriculum or writing a paper. And then I'm happy because I'm not doing this. It's never, I think, doing something where I became an expert, that I was so expert that I was comfortable would be very boring and satisfying for me. I always have to sort of do something where I'm learning from scratch.
Great. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for your work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Also, thank you for making time for this and for this enriching conversation.
I've loved it. As I said, you've done some very interesting research already and have been great questions. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. I'm sure it's going to inspire a lot, Mani.
That was such an inspiring conversation with Dr. Harini Nagendra. A reminder that cities are not just built on concrete, but on stories, ecosystems, and the people who nurture them. Her journey from studying satellite images to creating fictional worlds shows how curiosity can bridge science, storytelling, and sustainability. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the Expression Podcast on YouTube and your favorite audio platforms. Until next time, keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep expressing.